Hi, I'm Claire Peterson. At 32, I've built a successful career as an interior designer in a bustling city. My life seems pretty solid. Good job, a supportive boyfriend, and a close-knit circle of friends. But beneath the surface, my family was falling apart, and I never saw it coming. My younger sister, Lily, is 30 and just got married to Mark. They're a wonderful couple, always the life of the party. Planning her wedding should have been a joyous time, but it was anything but that. Our father, John Peterson, had been struggling for years. At 60, he was battling alcoholism and making reckless decisions ever since his divorce. Watching him spiral was painful, but I tried to stay strong for Lily. "Claire, are you sure Dad is going to make it?" Lily asked one evening as we went over the final details for her wedding. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I hope so, Lily. I really do. He promised he'd stay sober this time." Lily looked worried. "I'm scared he might not. What if he ruins everything?" I reached out and squeezed her shoulder. "We've done everything we can. Let's just focus on making your day perfect." Our father's presence was always a cloud over our family. Since his divorce, he'd become distant and unreliable. Then he started seeing Cassandra. From the moment I met her, something felt off. She was charming on the surface, but there was a coldness in her eyes that made me uneasy. "Have you noticed how Cassandra always seems to be whispering in Dad's ear?" I mentioned to my best friend, Sarah, during one of our coffee dates. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, she's always around him. It's like she's controlling him." I agreed, feeling a knot form in my stomach. I'm starting to think she's taking advantage of him. I need to find out more about her. Balancing wedding plans with my concerns about Dad and Cassandra was exhausting. My boyfriend, Daniel, was incredibly supportive. He always knew how to lift my spirits. "You're doing an amazing job, Claire," Daniel said one night as we relaxed at home. "Don't let this family drama get to you too much." I managed a small smile. "Thanks, Daniel. It means a lot." As the wedding day approached, the tension in our family grew. Lily and Mark wanted everything to be perfect, but my father's unpredictable behavior threatened to overshadow it all. Cassandra's influence over him seemed to tighten each day, making me more suspicious of her intentions. One afternoon, while we were selecting floral arrangements, Lily voiced her fears again. "Do you really think Dad will stay sober this time?" I tried to reassure her, though doubt gnawed at me. "I do. He wants to be there for you, Lily." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. I couldn't shake the feeling that Cassandra was up to something. Determined to protect my family, I began digging into her past. Late nights were spent scrolling through social media and making discreet calls to Dad's old friends. What I discovered was unsettling. Cassandra had a history that didn't quite add up. "Sarah, you need to see this." I called her one evening. I spread out the information I had gathered on our coffee table. Sarah's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. "This is serious, Claire. We need to be careful." Her support gave me the courage to continue my investigation, even though it meant sleepless nights and constant worry. I couldn't let anything ruin Lily's special day. The big day finally arrived. The venue was beautifully decorated, and Lily looked radiant in her wedding dress. But my anxiety was through the roof. As guests began to arrive, I kept a close eye on my father and Cassandra. Everything seemed calm, but I couldn't relax. "Everything okay, Claire?" Daniel asked, noticing my tension. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just a bit nervous. You know how it is." As the ceremony proceeded, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this time, things would go smoothly. But that hope was fragile, hanging by a thread. After the vows were exchanged, we moved to the reception. The room was filled with laughter and joy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. I watched as my father mingled with the guests, his presence still a source of unease. Lily caught my eye and gave me a reassuring smile. "See? Everything's perfect." I wanted to believe her, but my instinct screamed otherwise. Cassandra's eyes kept darting around the room, and her smile never reached her eyes. My heart raced as I wondered what she was planning. Then, out of nowhere, my father started to drink again. His laughter grew louder, and his movements became erratic. Cassandra stepped closer, her influence over him now undeniable. I felt a surge of anger and fear. "Claire, maybe you should get some fresh air," Daniel suggested gently. I nodded, trying to steady my nerves. "Yeah, I think I need a break." As I walked away, my mind was racing. I had to do something to protect Lily and myself. The tension in the room was palpable, and I knew the calm was just a facade. The real storm was brewing, and I had no idea how it would unfold. Looking back, I can see the signs I missed. But at that moment, all I could do was hold on to hope and try to keep everything together. Little did I know, the events of that night would change our lives forever. At the reception, I felt the tension rise between Cassandra and me. She glared coldly and said, "You're ruining everything, Claire. Stay out of our lives." I stood my ground, replying firmly, "I'm protecting Lily from your manipulation." Her frustration exploded. "You think you can control us? You're just a meddling sister." Suddenly, she grabbed my hands tightly and slapped me hard across the face. The reception had turned into a nightmare in an instant. I still remember the sound of Cassandra slapping me, sharp and unexpected. As I stumbled to the ground, the room went silent. Guests stared, whispers filling the air like a heavy fog. Daniel was right there, pulling me up and trying to calm me down. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I nodded, though my face burned with embarrassment and shock. "I think so," I managed to say, my voice shaky. Lily rushed to my side, her eyes wide with fear. "Claire, what happened? Are you hurt?" Before I could respond, a few guests started murmuring, some looking between Cassandra and us with confusion and concern. John, despite his drunken state, looked genuinely distressed. He tried to intervene, but Cassandra stepped back, her expression icy. "Let's get some fresh air," I suggested, desperate to diffuse the tension. Daniel nodded and guided me towards the exit, away from the prying eyes of the guests. Once outside, the cool night air hit me, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "I can't believe she did that," I whispered to Daniel. He squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You did nothing wrong." Cassandra lost control. But inside, I felt anything but okay. The rest of the evening was a blur of whispered conversations and awkward glances. Cassandra was escorted out by security, but the damage was done. The joyous atmosphere of the wedding was shattered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from over. Back at home, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Lily was devastated, blaming herself for not seeing the signs sooner. "I'm so sorry, Claire. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life," she said, tears streaming down her face. I hugged her tightly, trying to offer some comfort. "It's not your fault, Lily. We couldn't have known." Meanwhile, John was in denial. He kept insisting that Cassandra hadn't meant any harm and that I was overreacting. "She was just upset because things didn't go her way," he said stubbornly. I felt a surge of frustration. "Dad," she slapped me, "that's not something you can just brush off." He shook his head, clearly struggling with his own demons. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Claire. Let's not ruin Lily's wedding over this." His refusal to acknowledge what had happened only deepened the emotional wounds. I realized then that I couldn't keep enabling his behavior. It was time to set boundaries, no matter how difficult it would be. With Sarah's support, I decided to dig deeper into Cassandra's past. One evening, we sat in my living room, spreading out the information I had gathered. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a series of documents. "Cassandra has a history of fraud and assault. And these bank statements, they show unusual transfers between her accounts and Dad's." Sarah frowned, her eyes scanning the papers. "This is serious, Claire. If your father is involved, we need to handle this carefully." We spent hours piecing together the puzzle, uncovering connections that I never imagined. It became clear that Cassandra wasn't just a problematic girlfriend. She was using my father for her own gain. The more we found, the more convinced I became that exposing this was the only way to protect Lily and myself. One night, Sarah and I decided to confront John with the evidence. His reaction was everything I feared. He became angry and defensive, denying any wrongdoing and accusing me of betrayal. "How dare you accuse me of this?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. "Cassandra is good for me. She's the only one who understands me." But I stood my ground. "Dad, you're involved in her schemes. We have proof. This ends now." His face twisted with rage and sorrow. "You're ruining my life, Claire. You're just like everyone else." In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. For the sake of my sister and myself, I had to cut ties with him. It was the hardest decision I ever made, but I couldn't let his destructive behavior continue to harm us. As I walked away from that confrontation, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew I was making the right choice. With Sarah by my side, I felt stronger and more determined than ever to uncover the truth and rebuild my life away from the chaos that had consumed us for so long. Months passed since that devastating wedding night. The tension in my home had eased, but the scars remained. Cutting ties with Dad was one of the hardest decisions I ever made, but with Sarah's unwavering support, I felt stronger and more determined than ever to uncover the full extent of Cassandra's deceit. One evening, Sarah and I sat in my living room, surrounded by stacks of documents and photographs. "We need to present this to the authorities," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Cassandra's crimes and Dad's involvement are too serious to ignore." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "You're right. But how do we approach this without putting ourselves in danger?" Sarah looked thoughtful. "We need to be meticulous. Gather all the evidence and find a reliable lawyer who can help us navigate this." Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly. We compiled financial records, recorded conversations, and even found witness statements from some of Dad's old acquaintances who were aware of Cassandra's manipulative tactics. It was exhausting, but each piece of evidence brought us closer to the truth. One afternoon, as we were finalizing our case, I received a call from Daniel. "Claire, I've been thinking," he began, his voice filled with concern. "Maybe it's time we go to the police. This can't keep going on." I hesitated for a moment before responding. "I agree, Daniel. Let's set up a meeting with a lawyer tomorrow." The next day, Sarah, Daniel, and I met with a compassionate lawyer named Rebecca Thompson. She listened carefully as we laid out our findings. "This is substantial evidence," Rebecca assured us. "We can file a report and move forward with pressing charges against Cassandra. As for your father, we'll need to present the proof of his involvement as well." Feeling a mix of relief and anxiety, I knew we were taking the right steps. The legal process would be long and challenging, but it was necessary to protect ourselves and others from Cassandra's influence. As the weeks turned into months, the case gained momentum. Cassandra was arrested and charged with fraud and assault, while evidence against Dad's complicity in her schemes began to surface. The community was shocked, and the media quickly picked up the story, turning our quiet lives into a public spectacle. Through it all, my career flourished. My dedication and resilience caught the attention of my superiors, and I was promoted to senior interior designer. The recognition was gratifying, but my true strength came from the support of those closest to me: Lily, Mark, Daniel, and Sarah. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat down with Lily and Mark for dinner. "I'm so proud of you, Claire," Lily said, raising her glass. "You've handled everything with such grace." Mark nodded in agreement. "You're an inspiration to us all." Their words warmed my heart, reminding me of the importance of chosen family. Despite the chaos and betrayal, we had formed an unbreakable bond, stronger than ever before. As Cassandra's trial approached, the tension was palpable. The courtroom was packed, and every detail of her manipulative actions and Dad's involvement was laid bare for all to see. Rebecca presented our evidence with precision, and the truth couldn't be denied. During the trial, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a sense of justice being served. When the verdict was announced, it was clear that Cassandra's reign of manipulation was over. But the most shocking revelation came when additional evidence revealed Dad's deeper involvement, leading to his own downfall. Watching him lose everything was heartbreaking, but it was a necessary step for both of us to heal. Through therapy, I began to process the trauma and betrayal. Dr. Chun, my therapist, helped me navigate the complex emotions that came with cutting ties and exposing my father's actions. It's okay to feel conflicted, she reminded me during one session. You've been through a lot and healing takes time. With each passing day, I felt lighter, more at peace. My bond with Lily grew even stronger, and Daniel and Sarah remained my pillars of support. We celebrated small victories together, like Lily and Mark renewing their vows in an intimate backyard ceremony, symbolizing new beginnings and the strength of our chosen family. As the trial concluded and Cassandra was sentenced, I stood up to deliver my victim impact statement. My voice trembled, but I spoke with conviction. The scars from that night run deep, but they've made me stronger. I am not a victim, but a survivor. Surrounded by Lily, Mark, Daniel, and Sarah, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The past year had been a whirlwind of emotions and challenges, but it had also been a journey of resilience and healing. I looked around the room, seeing the faces of those who had stood by me through hell and back, and realized that true family isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty, love, and mutual respect. As I finished my statement, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The chapter of betrayal was closing, and a new one was beginning, filled with hope, gratitude, and the promise of a brighter future. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Months of hard work and sleepless nights had led us to this moment. Cassandra's trial was finally over, and the truth was out for everyone to see. Sitting beside me were Lily, Mark, Daniel, and Sarah, my chosen family who had stood by me through every storm. As the judge began the sentencing, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger at Cassandra for everything she had done, sadness for my father's downfall, and a sense of relief that justice was being served. Rebecca, our lawyer, presented the final pieces of evidence that tied John to Cassandra's schemes. The room was silent as the verdict was delivered. Cassandra was sentenced to several years in prison for her crimes, and the evidence against my father was undeniable. John's involvement led to his own legal troubles, a heartbreaking end to a man I once loved deeply. Watching him lose everything was painful, but it was a necessary step for me to heal and move forward. After the trial, I found solace in therapy. Dr. Chun helped me navigate the complex emotions that came with exposing my father's actions and cutting ties with him. Healing takes time, she reminded me during one session. You've shown incredible strength through this ordeal. With each passing day, I felt lighter. My bond with Lily grew even stronger as we supported each other through the aftermath. Daniel and Sarah remained my pillars of support, always there to listen and encourage me. Our chosen family had become my anchor, showing me that true family is built on love, loyalty, and mutual respect. 6 months after the trial, my career took an unexpected turn. My dedication and creativity caught the attention of my superiors, and I was promoted to senior interior designer. The recognition was gratifying, but what mattered most was the inner strength I had discovered. I felt more confident and ready to embrace the future. One evening, Lily and Mark invited me to dinner at their home. We celebrated not only their renewed vows but also the strength of our family bond. "I'm so proud of you, Claire," Lily said, raising her glass. "You've handled everything with such grace." Mark nodded, smiling warmly. "You're an inspiration to us all." Their words filled me with gratitude. Despite the chaos and betrayal, we had formed an unbreakable bond. Later that night, we gathered in my backyard for Lily and Mark's vow renewal ceremony. It was a simple, intimate affair, symbolizing new beginnings and the resilience of our chosen family. As I watched Lily and Mark exchange rings, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The past year had been a whirlwind of emotions and challenges, but it had also been a journey of healing and growth. Surrounded by those who truly mattered, I realized that our family was stronger than ever. A month after the vow renewal, the final chapter of Cassandra's trial concluded. I stood in the courtroom to deliver my victim impact statement. My voice trembled, but I spoke with conviction. The scars from that night run deep, but they've made me stronger. I am not a victim, but a survivor. Looking around the room, I saw the faces of Lily, Mark, Daniel, and Sarah. Their support gave me the courage to speak my truth. As Cassandra was led away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter of betrayal was finally closing, and a new one was beginning. That evening, we gathered at my favorite restaurant to celebrate my promotion and our collective resilience. Zoe raised her glass, her eyes filled with pride. "To the strongest people I know," she toasted. I smiled, clinking glasses with my family. "To all of us. We've proven that family isn't just about blood, it's about the loyalty and love we choose to share." As we laughed and shared stories, I felt a profound sense of hope and gratitude. The past year had been a nightmare, but it had also been a gift. It taught me about my own strength, the importance of setting boundaries, and the beauty of finding a family built on genuine love and support. Sitting there, surrounded by those who mattered most, I knew that this was my happy ending. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and beautiful in its own way. As I looked toward the future, I felt nothing but hope and excitement for the life I was building, a life filled with love, resilience, and the promise of new beginnings. It all started the night I found out. I never expected it, not in a million years, but the truth hit me like a wrecking ball. My name is Caroline, and I thought I had everything: a beautiful home, a loving husband, and a future ahead of me. What I didn't know was that my world was about to be turned upside down, not by something out of my control, but by someone I trusted the most, my husband, Thomas. We had been married for 6 years. Ever since the day we walked down the aisle, I believed I had found my soulmate. But that was before my father passed away unexpectedly, leaving me his entire estate, including his business. I never wanted much. I was content with my life, but I could never ignore the immense responsibility that came with the inheritance. Thomas was supportive at first, telling me I deserved it all. He'd smile and make promises about helping me manage everything. But the deeper we got into it, the more I started to feel his intentions weren't as pure as they seemed. I didn't notice the signs right away, small things that seemed innocent enough, like his late nights at the office or his sudden distance. But then, one day, I found the message on his phone. The message wasn't from a business client, like I assumed. It was from Emma, his coworker, and the words pierced my heart. "I can't wait for tonight. It's our little secret." I had to know more, so I started looking. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Thomas had been seeing Emma behind my back for months. I confronted him that night, and he didn't deny it. Instead, he tried to justify it. The man I thought I knew, the man I thought loved me, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. But that wasn't the only shock waiting for me. As I stood there, trembling with the weight of what I had just learned, Thomas made another demand. He didn't beg for forgiveness or promise to make things right. No, instead, he demanded something far more cruel. "You know," he said, his voice cold and calculating, "since your father's company is now yours, I think it's time we make it ours too. Transfer everything into my name. If you really want to move on, this is the only way." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He wanted my inheritance. He wanted the one thing my father left me, the one thing that I had worked so hard to protect, to be under his control. I refused, of course. That was my father's legacy. But my refusal only made him angrier. The man who I had thought was my partner in life now stood before me, a stranger. The same hands that once held mine in love now reached for me in anger. In an instant, he snapped. I felt the blow before I even knew what was happening, a sharp pain on the side of my head as he struck me with something heavy. I stumbled, trying to process what had just occurred. Thomas didn't even seem to care about what he had done. He just stared at me, his face full of fury, as I realized that everything had changed in a matter of seconds. The pain in my head was overwhelming. I stumbled backward, trying to steady myself, but everything felt blurry. My mind was racing. How could this be happening? The man I married, the man I trusted, had just hit me. And not just any man, but the one who wanted my inheritance, my father's legacy, all because of his greed. I felt a wave of disbelief, but it soon turned into anger. How dare he? How dare he think he could take something that wasn't his? And yet, as much as I wanted to lash out, to scream and make him feel what I was feeling, I knew it was pointless. The damage had been done. Thomas stood there, staring at me as if I was the problem. He didn't apologize or show any sign of remorse. Instead, he walked past me, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. If you really loved me, you'd do this for us. But I guess it's too late for that now. I watched him leave the room, but I couldn't move. My thoughts were in turmoil, my mind clouded with shock and hurt. How had it come to this? I'd always thought that love meant partnership, trust, and loyalty. But now, I realized I had been living in a lie. After what felt like an eternity, I finally gathered the strength to stand up. I couldn't let him get away with this. I couldn't let him walk out of my life and take everything with him. This wasn't just about the money or the inheritance anymore. It was about my dignity, my right to decide what happens next. I walked to my office and shut the door behind me, locking it. The first thing I did was check the legal documents my father had left behind. They were clear: the company, the house, everything was mine, and there was no way I would let Thomas take it from me. But more than that, I realized that I had been letting him control me for too long. I had given him power over my decisions, over my life, and I couldn't do that anymore. The confrontation we had earlier was a wake-up call. It wasn't just about his infidelity. It was about the way he had manipulated me, pretending to be someone he wasn't. He wanted my wealth, my security, and he didn't care what he had to do to get it. But I wasn't going to let him win. I grabbed my phone and called a lawyer. I needed help, someone who could guide me through this mess and protect what was mine. I needed to be smart. The lawyer, a woman named Rachel, was kind but firm. She explained that I had the legal right to everything my father left me, but she also warned me about what I was up against. "This is going to get ugly," she said. "Thomas is going to fight for what he wants. But you need to be ready. You can't let him manipulate you anymore." Her words stuck with me as I hung up the phone. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was one I had to walk alone. I knew what I needed to do. The next few days felt like a blur. I was so focused on preparing for the legal battle that I didn't even notice the silence between Thomas and me. He had stayed at a hotel after our fight, but he still expected me to let him back into our home. He didn't understand that the woman he had once known was gone. There was no more space for him in my life. I had arranged for him to meet with me one final time before the legal proceedings began. It was time for me to make my stand. The evening came, and Thomas showed up at our house, looking as confident as ever. His smile faltered when he saw the legal papers on the table. I didn't say a word. I just pushed them toward him. "This is it," I said quietly. "It's over." He looked at the papers, then back at me. "You really think you can take everything from me?" he sneered. "You think I'm just going to walk away after everything we've built together?" "We didn't build anything together, Thomas," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You built lies. You built betrayal. And now you're going to pay for it." His face twisted with anger as he stood up from the table. "You don't have any idea what you're doing," he spat. "You're nothing without me. You're just a woman who inherited some money. It means nothing." I stood my ground, refusing to let his words break me. "I'm not nothing. I'm Caroline, and I don't need you to define who I am." The tension between us was palpable. I could see the rage building in his eyes, and I knew he wasn't going to back down without a fight. But I was ready. He took a step toward me, and before I could react, his hand shot out, grabbing my arm tightly. "You're making a huge mistake," he growled. "I won't let you take everything from me." I could feel his anger radiating off him, but I wasn't afraid anymore. This was the final test. The moment when I had to prove that I wouldn't let him walk all over me. "Let go of me, Thomas," I said, my voice calm but firm. For a moment, he just stood there, glaring at me. Then, slowly, he released my arm and stepped back, his face full of fury. "We'll see who wins in the end," he muttered before storming out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The door slammed behind him, and I stood there, shaking with a mixture of fear and relief. He was gone, but I knew this wasn't over. It had only just begun. The weight of everything, my inheritance, my marriage, the betrayal, felt unbearable at times, but deep down, I knew it was time to let go of everything that had kept me tied to Thomas. He was right about one thing. I didn't need him to define who I was. I had a chance now to build something on my own, to reclaim the life he had tried to steal from me. The days that followed were filled with paperwork, calls, and sleepless nights. Rachel, my lawyer, guided me through the process, and with each step, I felt more certain that I was making the right decision. But the emotional toll was exhausting. I had never imagined that the man I loved would turn on me this way, that his greed would overshadow everything we had built together. Despite the growing distance, Thomas still tried to assert control. He began contacting my family, telling them lies about me and the situation. He painted himself as the victim, claiming I was cold and heartless, that I had taken everything from him. His words spread like wildfire, and soon, my family was caught in the crossfire. My mother called me one evening, her voice shaking with worry. "Caroline, you have to listen to me," she said. "What's happening with Thomas? He's telling everyone you're stealing from him. You need to make things right. Don't let this tear our family apart." I had heard enough. "Mom, I'm not stealing from him. I'm protecting what's mine. I'm protecting what my father left me." "But why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why can't you just forgive him? You've been through so much together." I felt a pang of guilt, but I knew what I had to do. I can't forgive someone who doesn't respect me, who's only interested in what I have. I'm not a charity, and I'm not going to keep letting him walk all over me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, my mom spoke. "I understand. Just be careful. This could get ugly." I hung up the phone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something that couldn't be replaced. Family, trust, love, they all seemed so fragile now. But I had no choice but to move forward. A few weeks later, we found ourselves in court. The battle over my inheritance had turned into a bitter, public spectacle. Thomas hired his own lawyer, someone just as ruthless and manipulative as he was. They tried every tactic, from questioning my ability to manage my father's company to accusing me of hiding assets. But no matter what they threw at me, I stood firm. On the day of the final hearing, the courtroom was packed. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat in front of the judge, waiting for the verdict. Thomas sat across from me, his expression cold, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He had underestimated me. As the judge reviewed the evidence and considered both sides, I held my breath. I had spent so many sleepless nights wondering if I had made the right choice, if I had done enough to protect my future. The fear of losing it all, of having to give in to Thomas's demands, almost consumed me. Finally, the judge spoke. "After reviewing the case, it is clear that the inheritance belongs solely to Caroline, as stipulated in her father's will. Thomas, you will receive no share of the estate. Any claims of emotional distress or manipulation have been dismissed." I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. The battle was over. The judge had ruled in my favor, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. Thomas had lost. But more importantly, I had won back my life. It took some time, but slowly I began to rebuild. I sold the house that Thomas and I had once shared and used the money to expand my father's business, making it my own. I hired a team of professionals to help me manage the company, and with every step, I felt stronger and more in control of my destiny. But the most important part of my healing was learning to trust myself again. For years, I had relied on Thomas, let him control my decisions, and believed in the future he promised. Now I was learning to live for me, to pursue my own goals and dreams without fear of someone else's manipulation. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the pain of the past crept in, reminding me of the betrayal. But I kept moving forward. I kept building. One evening, as I stood in the office overlooking the city, I realized that I had come a long way. The woman I was now was different from the one I had been when Thomas first came into my life. I had grown, not just in strength but in wisdom. I was no longer the woman who would let someone take from me. I was Caroline, the woman who took back what was rightfully hers. The months that followed the court battle were some of the most transformative of my life. I had spent so long living in the shadow of my marriage, allowing Thomas's actions and demands to dictate the course of my future. But now, for the first time in years, I was truly free. The weight of the inheritance no longer felt like a burden. It was a symbol of my strength, my resilience. With the business flourishing and a new sense of independence, I started making decisions based on my own desires and not on anyone else's expectations. I didn't need to answer to Thomas, my family, or anyone else. I was building something for myself, something that couldn't be taken away by betrayal or greed. But as much as I had reclaimed my life, there were still moments when the past would resurface. The memories of Thomas's betrayal, his coldness, and the way he had tried to manipulate me for my wealth would haunt me, especially in quiet moments when I was alone. Yet, I learned to use those memories as fuel to keep moving forward, reminding myself of the strength it took to get here. One afternoon, while I was reviewing some documents at the office, my lawyer, Rachel, called. "Caroline," she said, her tone serious. "There's something you need to know. Thomas has filed another appeal. He's not giving up." I wasn't surprised. After everything he'd done, I knew he wouldn't walk away easily. But this time I was ready. "Let him try," I replied, my voice calm. "He doesn't understand that I've already won." Rachel was silent for a moment before responding. "I know. But I just wanted to make sure you were prepared. He might try to drag this out for months, and it could get ugly again." "I'm prepared for whatever he throws at me," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Let him do his worst. I won't back down." A few weeks later, Thomas resurfaced. This time, he tried a different approach. He reached out to me directly, sending a message that read, "Caroline, I made a mistake. I've realized that I let greed and jealousy cloud my judgment. I know I hurt you, but I'm asking for a chance to make things right. Can we meet and talk?" I stared at the message for what felt like hours. Part of me wanted to believe that he had changed, that he had truly seen the error of his ways. But I knew better. I had spent too long living in his lies, waiting for him to show me the love and respect I deserved. It wasn't just his actions that had hurt me. It was his utter disregard for who I was as a person, as someone capable of making her own decisions. I sat down at my desk and typed a reply, keeping my voice steady but firm. "I've given you all the chances I can, Thomas. It's over. I'm not the same person I was when we met. I've moved on, and I'm not interested in revisiting the past." I hit send, and as I sat back in my chair, I felt a sense of closure. I had let go of the man who once held so much power over me, and with that, I had also let go of all the pain he caused. I realized then that I had not just taken back my inheritance, I had taken back my life. The years that followed were filled with growth. I expanded my father's business, turning it into a successful company that not only provided for me, but also for others. I surrounded myself with people who supported me, true friends, loyal employees, and mentors who believed in me long after Thomas had abandoned me. I didn't need a man's approval to feel worthy. I didn't need anyone's validation to know that I was enough. For the first time in my life, I felt complete, whole, not because of what I had, but because of who I had become. One evening, as I sat in my office overlooking the city skyline, I thought about everything that had led me here. The pain, the betrayal, the long nights spent wondering if I'd ever be able to move forward. But now, all of that seemed so distant. I had survived it all, and in the end, I had come out stronger than ever. Looking out at the city, I knew this was just the beginning. I was no longer a woman defined by the man who betrayed me. I was Caroline, strong, independent, and ready for whatever the future held. And as I watched the sun set behind the skyline, I knew one thing for certain. No one would ever take away my happiness again.
The sound of Elsie's muffled sobs greeted me as I stepped into Derek and Marlene's house to celebrate my granddaughter's 12th birthday. My heart sank. Those weren't the joyful cries of a happy child. I followed the noise down the hallway to a room with a steel door, no decorations adorning its cold surface. "Derek? Marlene?" I called out, knocking firmly. No response. I pressed my ear against the unforgiving metal. Elsie's whimpers grew louder, intermingled with the familiar scratching of pencil against paper. Using the spare key Derek had given me, I unlocked the door. The sight before me ignited a fire of rage within. My sweet Elsie sat hunched over a piano keyboard, red-eyed and frazzled. The room was dimly lit and lined wall-to-wall with music sheets, like a prison cell designed to strip her of creativity and joy. "Elsie!" I gasped, darting to her side. She flinched, her listless gaze slowly meeting mine. "Honey, what's going on? Are you okay?" Before she could respond, the door burst open. Marlene stood fuming, her face contorted into a scowl that sent shivers down my spine. "What are you doing in here?" she growled, snatching Elsie by the arm and wrenching her away from me. "I told you not to disturb her practice," Elsie whimpered, trembling in Marlene's vice-like grip. "But Grandma—" "Silence!" Marlene's shrill voice silenced her pleading cry. "You know the rules. No distractions until you've perfected this piece." "Marlene, that's enough!" I stepped forward, shielding Elsie with my body. "What kind of hellish prison is this? She's just a child, for God's sake." Marlene's glare could have melted steel. "Stay out of this, Mother. You're too soft on her. Elsie has a gift, and I'll do whatever it takes to nurture it." By locking her away like a caged animal? Look at her, Marlene. She's absolutely miserable. Tough love is necessary to achieve greatness, something you never understood with Derek. She spat the words like venom. "I won't let Elsie squander her talents like her father did. Not on my watch." My blood boiled, but I refused to engage her twisted rationalization. Keeping my tone measured, I turned to my trembling granddaughter. "Elsie, sweetheart, go wait in the living room. I need to have a talk with your mother." Elsie hesitated, her eyes pleading for an escape hatch. But Marlene's iron glare subdued her momentary courage. With a defeated sigh, she slumped out of that wretched room, not even bothering to grab her belongings. As the door clicked shut, I wheeled on Marlene, aiming my fiercest look straight into her delusional eyes. "How dare you treat her this way? Have you lost your mind?" Marlene scoffed, folding her arms defiantly. "I'm giving her the training, the discipline that she needs to become a world-class pianist, something you could never comprehend." "And at what cost?" I demanded, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Her childhood? Her happiness? You're stealing her spirit away, piece by piece." "Don't be so dramatic." She rolled her eyes. "I'm doing what's best for her future success. Unlike you, I'm not going to let my child's potential go to waste." Her words stung, dredging up past failures I thought I'd buried long ago. But this wasn't about me or my shortcomings. It was about protecting Elsie. I steeled my resolve, meeting Marlene's contemptuous glare with unwavering determination. "If you think for 1 second that I'll stand by while you crush that poor girl's soul, you're gravely mistaken. This ends now." The battle lines were drawn. As Marlene and I stared each other down in that dimly lit chamber of horrors, I knew there would be no turning back. For Elsie's sake, I had to fight and win. After my confrontation with Marlene, I stormed out of that cursed house, my mind racing. How could she treat Elsie that way? My own granddaughter, sobbing and imprisoned like a common criminal? The thought made me ill. In the days that followed, I did some digging into Marlene's past. What I uncovered explained a lot about her twisted motivations. Marlene came from an affluent family with a reputation for musical excellence to uphold. Her own mother, a celebrated concert pianist, had groomed her relentlessly as a prodigy from a young age. The pressure crushed Marlene's passion, but she dutifully followed the path laid out for her, until she faltered during a career-defining recital at Juilliard. That failure shattered her psyche, and her family promptly disowned her in disgrace. The revelation crushed her dreams and her spirit. She spent years drifting aimlessly until meeting my son Derek. Somehow, the strength and stability Derek provided helped Marlene regain her sense of purpose. But the wounds of her childhood never healed. Her obsession with molding Elsie into the musical icon she could never become only grew more ravenous, more unhinged. I knew then that if I didn't act fast, Marlene would rob Elsie of her very identity. A few days later, I invited myself over again, this time with the pretense of a family chat. As expected, Marlene treated me with icy disdain. but I refused to back down. "You can't treat Elsie like a circus animal forever," I scolded her in the living room. "She's a growing girl who needs freedom, friends, sunshine." Marlene rolled her eyes. "Don't start with your sentimental crap again. All that matters is hardening Elsie's focus, eliminating distractions. That's the only way she'll reach her full potential." "By destroying her spirit?" I cried incredulously. On cue, Elsie shuffled in looking ragged and exhausted. "There you are, lazybones," Marlene snapped. "Get over here and show Grandma how far we've come." The haunted look in my granddaughter's eyes as she took her place at the piano keys will forever be seared into my brain. Slowly, mechanically, she began playing an intricate Mozart piece with cold, clinical precision. Not an ounce of passion or joy flowed from those nimble fingers. When she finished, Marlene turned to me with a triumphant smirk. "You see? Perfection takes sacrifice. That's something your pathetic son could never grasp." Before I could object, Elsie suddenly collapsed into a fit of shuddering sobs. In a flash, I was at her side, cradling the poor girl as she cried into my chest. "Please." "No more," she whimpered between ragged breaths. I can't do this anymore." My blood boiled over as I glared at the vile woman towering over us. "Are you happy now, you wretched hag? Look at what you've done to her." Marlene's face flushed a deep crimson, her lips curling into a sneer of pure contempt. "How dare you let sentiment cloud your judgment? I'll not have my daughter grow up to be a quitter like the rest of your loser family." I saw red. Before I could stop myself, I stood and charged at Marlene, my hands coiled into trembling fists. "You evil, miserable Hey!" A booming voice froze me mid-lunge. Derek barreled into the room, grabbing me by the shoulders. "What in the hell is going on here?" As my son stared at me in shock and confusion, I knew I had to make him see the truth. If I didn't, Marlene's torment of Elsie would never end. I couldn't fail now, not when my granddaughter's future was at stake. Steeling my nerves, I turned to Derek and uttered the words I'd been dreading. "Your wife is abusing your daughter." Derek stood frozen, his mouth agape as my accusation hung in the air like a suffocating fog. Marlene wasted no time trying to regain control of the situation. "Don't listen to her ramblings, dear," she purred, slithering up to Derek with serpentine charm. "You know how emotional your mother can get. She's just jealous of Elsie's talents." "Jealous?" I sputtered, my rage bubbling over. "You twisted, delusional snake! I'm trying to protect my granddaughter from your psychotic abuse." Derek's brow furrowed in confusion as he looked from me to Marlene and back again. "Abuse? What are you talking about, Mom?" "Open your eyes, son," I pleaded, gesturing to the disheveled, cowering form of Elsie still crumpled on the floor. "Look at what your wife's training has done to that sweet child." A glimmer of clarity crept across Derek's face as he absorbed the heart-wrenching scene before him. But Marlene swiftly snuffed it out with a theatrical display of motherly affection. Sweeping over to Elsie, she scooped the quivering girl into a tight embrace. There, Pumpkin, don't listen to Grandma's scary stories. Mommy just wants what's best for her little star." Derek's jaw clenched as he warred with the conflicting realities vying for his trust. In that moment, I realized the true insidiousness of Marlene's manipulations. I had to break through at all costs. "That's enough of your lies," I bellowed, startling them both. Reaching into my pocket, I revealed the sleek phone I had purposely left recording audio during our confrontation. "You hear that, Derek? I have proof of the vile way your witch of a wife treats your daughter." My voice dripped with a mixture of fury and triumph as realization crept across Marlene's twisted features. You had no right," she seethed through gritted teeth. "Every right," I shot back with righteous fury. "As her grandmother, I'll do whatever it takes to protect Elsie from your madness." Derek stood shell-shocked as Marlene and I faced off, tremors of rage rolling off us both in palpable waves. Finally, my son found his voice. "Mother," he said in a tone that brokered no argument, "show me what you have on that recording. Now." My heart soared with vindication as I eagerly played back the device. Marlene's harrowing threats and insults filled the room in lurid detail as poor Elsie wept and pleaded for mercy. Derek's face drained of color as the truth burrowed into his consciousness. When the clips ended, a heavy silence blanketed us all. Nobody dared break it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Derek moved toward Marlene with grim determination. "Get out," he said in a low, dangerous rumble. Marlene blinked, her mouth forming a shocked O. What? You heard me, Derek growled through gritted teeth. I want you out of this house. Tonight. I'll make arrangements for Elsie and send for your things later. But Derek, Marlene sputtered, her mask of regal confidence melting away as panic set in. You can't be serious. It's all a misunderstanding. Derek's face twisted into an expression of pure disgust and loathing. Save it. I'm done being blinded by your manipulations. What kind of mother terrorizes their own child like that? His words lanced deep, a killing blow to Marlene's delusional charade. She opened her mouth as if to protest further, but seemed to think better of it. With a final, hateful glare in my direction, she stormed out of the room. Elsie watched her mother's retreat with a strange, hollow look, as if awakening from a long, tumultuous dream. Derek pulled her close, cradling his daughter's fragile form while I looked on with bittersweet relief. The worst was over, or so I thought at the time, but the battle to secure Elsie's freedom had only just begun. In the days following Marlene's explosive exit, an uneasy calm settled over Derek's household. Elsie roamed the home in a daze, as if emerging from a years-long trance. Simple pleasures like playing outside or watching cartoons seemed novel concepts to her. Derek tried valiantly to make up for lost time, but his demanding job often pulled him away, leaving me to pick up the pieces and guide my wounded granddaughter back to normalcy. It wasn't easy. Years of Marlene's toxic manipulations had taken their toll, but I was determined to help Elsie rediscover the joy and freedom she deserved. Our neighbor Simon Hayes proved an unexpected ally in that mission. A kindly divorced man who lived 2 doors down, Simon had quietly observed the troubling patterns at Derek's home for years. I had my suspicions something wasn't right over there, he told me one morning as we sipped coffee on his patio. But every time I tried getting close to Elsie, that psycho wife of Derek's would chase me off like a mangy dog. I shuddered, remembering Marlene's fierce territorial instincts when it came to protecting Elsie from outside influences. Well, she's out of the picture now. For good, I hope. Simon's expression turned grave. You know it won't be that easy, right? Women like that don't just slink away quietly. His ominous words sent a chill down my spine. Before I could respond, Elsie bounded over, her face alight for the first time in ages. Grandma, Mr. Simon, can I go explore the creek today? She bounced on her toes with pent-up energy, reminding me so vividly of her joy-filled younger self. Of course, sweetie, I beamed, pulling her into a bear hug. Just be back before dinner, okay? She grinned and scampered off, grabbing a sketch pad and colored pencils on her way out. A familiar pang tugged at my heart as I watched her go. How many other childhood memories had that evil woman stolen from my grandbaby? You got lucky, you know. Simon's gruff voice pulled me from my brooding. Having proof of what that psycho was doing, I nodded soberly. Believe me, I know, which is why I'll stay vigilant until we've secured Elsie's future for good. The burly man frowned, seeming to wrestle with something on his mind. Finally, he spoke up in a low, conspiratorial tone. There's more. Things I've documented over the years. Videos, audio recordings, stuff that could really nail that witch to the wall in court if need be. I gaped at him in astonishment. Videos? Of Marlene? How? Simon's expression turned grim. Let's just say I invested in some high-tech security cameras a while back, the kind that can see and hear for blocks. He let that ominous fact linger for a beat before continuing. Look, I got the footage backed up somewhere safe. Could help make sure that snake never slithers near Elsie again. My head spun as I processed his bombshell admission. Part of me felt guilty about the prospect of weaponizing a neighbor's surveillance data against Marlene. But after the hell she'd put my family through, I quickly shoved those qualms aside. Thank you, Simon, I replied with grave sincerity. I vow to use any ammunition at my disposal to protect Elsie going forward. The man grunted and gave a resolute nod. You just say the word and I'll... Elsie! Derek's panicked bellow cut our hushed conference short. He came tearing around the hedges toward us, eyes wild and chest heaving. Marlene, she showed up out of nowhere, he sputtered, struggling to catch his breath. Grabbed Elsie and is trying to take her somewhere. What? I shot to my feet, blood draining from my face. Oh God, no. Simon was already in motion, bolting for his back door. Stay here. I'll get the van. As Derek collapsed in a heap on the patio, I felt the winds of battle whipping up once again. Marlene was far from finished, and so was my fight to save Elsie's future. By the time Simon screeched his van into Derek's driveway, I had already sprung into frantic motion. I burst through the front door, Derek hot on my heels, and began a desperate search for any signs of my missing granddaughter. "Elsie?" I called out in a strained, quavering voice. "Elsie, where are you?" No response except the faint rustle of leaves fluttering outside an open window. Fear gripped me in icy talons as visions of Marlene's twisted revenge played out in lurid detail in my mind's eye. "She came out of nowhere," Derek kept repeating in a daze, his face drained of color. "Just appeared like a ghost and grabbed Elsie before I could react." Simon brushed past us both, his jaw set in grim determination. "I'm calling the cops. She couldn't have gotten far with a kid in tow." But I knew better than to underestimate the lengths Marlene would go to hold on to her warped ambitions. My heart thundered to a staccato beat of pure rage and dread as I tore through the house, hunting any clue to where that psychotic woman had fled with my Elsie. Finally, a tiny voice reached my ears from the direction of the living room. A voice so pitiful and broken that it froze the blood in my veins. "Grandma." I wheeled around, following the sound to a closet door left ajar. Summoning every ounce of my courage, I pulled it open to find a horrific sight. Elsie, crumpled in a trembling heap, one hand bound with rope to the metal rack above, her eyes brimmed with a haunted mixture of terror and pleading as her lips formed the words again. "Grandma, help!" "Elsie!" I cried out, quickly untying the knot and scooping her frail body into my arms. "Oh, honey, what did that monster do to you?" "Mother?" She whimpered, clinging to me with desperation. She said he couldn't leave until I was perfect. My heart sank in revulsion as fitful glimpses of what Marlene had put this poor child through flashed across my mind's eye. Clutching Elsie tighter, I spun to see Derek and Simon staring at us with twin masks of horror. "We have to get out of here." I clutched Elsie fiercely to my chest. "Simon, we need to hide somewhere until the authorities get that woman." My neighbor gave a curt nod and reached for his cell phone, but before he could punch in the first digit, a malevolent voice sliced through the tension like a razor. "Oh, I don't think so, Mother." Marlene emerged from the shadows in the hallway behind us, her feral gaze boring into mine with psychotic intensity. In her hand she gripped a wicked-looking blade, its serrated edge glinting with sick menace. "One more step," she seethed in a guttural rasp. "And I swear on all that's holy, you'll never see your precious granddaughter alive again." Ice water flooded my veins as I froze to the spot, Elsie whimpering into my shoulder like a frightened mouse. Derek lunged with futile rage, but Marlene casually swatted him aside with a dismissive backhand. "Stay down, you simpering fool," she spat, her voice dripping with unbridled contempt. "This is what happens when you let bleeding heart sentiments cloud your judgment." With a deep, shuddering breath, I hugged Elsie as close as I could and faced my deranged daughter-in-law. "Whatever you want, Marlene. Please, just don't hurt her. Haven't you put her through enough torment?" Something shifted in those hateful eyes. A bitter, twisted smile split her features as she let out a grating chuckle that raised the hairs on my neck. "Torment? You think this is about torment?" Marlene's free hand clutched her chest in a pantomime of tortured anguish. This was her salvation, her one chance to claw past the curse of mediocrity that afflicts our bloodline. She took a jerking step closer, pressing the cold steel against my cheek, its razor edge biting my flesh. I held my ground, staring her down as Elsie sobbed into my neck. "I gave her the gift you were never strong enough to give Derek," Marlene hissed through gritted teeth. "The gift of my relentless drive, my burning ambition, a righteous obsession, to escape the shackles of a meaningless, forgotten existence." A solitary tear traced down her cheek as her impassioned tirade reached its crescendo. "But you had to defile that sacred commitment, didn't you? Poisoning her mind with your sickening, weak-willed compassion." She pulled the blade away and took a lurching step backwards, her whole body quivering. I watched in mute horror as the woman teetered on the edge of total madness, for my own fear rendered insignificant next to the safety of my granddaughter. In that suspended moment, Elsie lifted her head and met my gaze with luminous, imploring eyes. Without a single word, that child conveyed everything I needed to hear in that soul-rending stare, The torment, the deprivation, the shredding of all joy and hope and identity inflicted by her own mother's callous obsession. I didn't hesitate. Gathering my courage, I thrust Elsie into Derek's arms and turned to face Marlene squarely. "Get out!" The demented woman blinked, her tirade fading into sheer dumbfounded rage. "What did you say to me?" "You heard me," I bellowed, taking a bold step forward. "I want you out of my family's life once and for all. Your poison has done enough damage, you deranged witch." Marlene's mouth contorted into a hideous sneer. "The damage is only beginning, you meddling old crone." She lunged with feral abandon, swinging the blade in a vicious horizontal arc. I ducked just in time, reeling backwards as the razor-sharp edge sliced through the air where my neck had been. "Mom?" Derek launched himself at Marlene with a guttural roar, but she swatted him away like a fly. The blade planted itself into the wall as she wrestled him to the ground. "You're as pathetic as she says." Marlene spat, raining blows down on Derek's head. "Just a sad, useless shell of a man." I acted on pure instinct. Grabbing an antique globe from the end table, I wound up and swung the heavy orb squarely at the back of Marlene's skull. It connected with a sickening crunch, sending her sprawling to the side. My chest heaved with exertion as I glared down at the crumpled, barely conscious heap that had once been my daughter-in-law. "Somebody get the authorities on the line," I rasped, spitting out the words like daggers. "Before I do something we'll all regret." A dismal, haunting silence swallowed us all. The battle for Elsie's soul had reached its bloody culmination, but at what cost? When the police finally arrived, the scene must have painted a ghastly picture of domestic carnage. Derek slumped against the wall, semi-conscious and spattered with blood. Marlene bound with zip ties and muttering incoherently on the floor. And me, Lorraine Ellis, clutching my sobbing granddaughter with a vice-like grip as the madness of the past few hours finally caught up to all of us. The officers had to practically pry Elsie from my arms to assess her condition. As they loaded Marlene into the back of their cruiser like a rabid animal, she let out one final tortured howl that sent chills down my spine. "You'll all be forgotten," she screeched, writhing against her restraints. Nameless vagrants wasting away in the gutter with the rest of the talentless nobodies. Then she was gone, like a living nightmare being hauled away. But her lingering malice hung over us all with palpable dread. What now? Where did we go from this point? Over the next few days, the fallout from Marlene's explosive unraveling rippled through our quiet community in waves. Derek resolved to take an extended leave of absence from work to be with Elsie and enter family therapy to process the trauma. Meanwhile, Marlene faced a firestorm of legal troubles. Her assault charges were compounded by allegations of child abuse and imprisonment uncovered during the investigation. The judge ultimately ruled that she should undergo mandatory psychiatric evaluation and counseling to determine the threat she posed to her own daughter. Perhaps the most shocking development was the swift and merciless backlash from our once idyllic neighborhood. Word spread like wildfire about Marlene's deranged obsession and the lengths she went to transform Elsie into a musical prodigy. Suddenly, the woman who everyone thought was just an overachieving tiger mom became persona non grata, a cautionary tale of parenthood gone horrifically wrong. People I had known for years now openly shunned me and Derek in the streets, as if the curse of Marlene's insanity might somehow rub off on us. The cruelest judgments, however, were reserved for poor Elsie. "Did you hear about the Bennett girl? What a shame, such a waste of talent." "You know her mother was grooming her for Juilliard from birth? Can you imagine the pressure? No wonder the girl cracked. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as they say." Though they tried to shield her, the whispers and sideways glances cut Elsie deeper than any blade. The idea that her own mother's delusional ambition had somehow indelibly stained her future potential was a shadow she couldn't escape. At least not by staying in this town much longer. It was around this time that Simon, bless his ornery heart, stepped up with a proposition. His sister happened to manage a ranch in a remote part of Montana where Derek and Elsie could live off the grid for as long as they needed to heal. A chance to make a clean break and start totally anew. Though I longed for them to stay nearby, I knew it was the wisest path forward. So with a heavy heart, I began making preparations to send my loved ones off to greener pastures. far from the toxic legacy Marlene had bequeathed to us all. As I stood in the driveway hugging Elsie goodbye, I fought back hot tears. This wasn't a McKenna family tradition I ever wanted to repeat, watching the next generation flee their trauma to find hope elsewhere. But if that's what it took to free my granddaughter from the shackles of her mother's madness, then so be it. No sacrifice was too great to redeem Elsie's shattered spirit. "I love you, sweetheart," I whispered, cradling her face in my hands. Her vacant eyes glistened with a lifetime's worth of hurt and confusion. "No matter where life takes you, I'll always be here when you need me." She nodded wordlessly, shuffling toward the waiting truck. As the engine sputtered to life and they pulled away, I felt a profound sense of resolution wash over me. By sheer grit and the grace of heaven itself, I had kept my vow. Marlene's toxic reign of terror had ended. All that remained was to help Elsie rediscover the joy that had been so cruelly robbed from her childhood. With Derek and Elsie securely on their way to a fresh start in Montana, I steeled myself for the battles still to come. Though Marlene was behind bars awaiting her fate, I knew a vile woman like her wouldn't go down without an explosive fight. My prediction proved correct when Marlene's preliminary hearing kicked off a firestorm of sensationalist media coverage. Overnight, our sleepy suburb found itself thrust into the national spotlight as armchair pundits and sanctimommies engaged in a fervent public debate. This tiger mom obviously took her parenting approach too far. Are we really going to start jailing mothers for being too demanding of their children's potential? If she genuinely believed she was doing what was best for her kid, where do we draw the line between strict and psychotic? The furor reached stratospheric heights when excerpts from Marlene's psych evaluation leaked, revealing the true pathological depths of her delusions. Her obsession with transforming Elsie into a musical superstar was rooted in unresolved trauma from her own childhood. Marlene had been bred from birth as the heir to her mother's musical legacy, just another link in the chain to perpetuate a dynastic myth of artistic supremacy. But when she failed to live up to those impossible expectations, her family swiftly discarded her like so much disposable trash. For years she drifted rudderless, grasping for any sense of purpose or belonging. Then Elsie was born, and Marlene saw her chance to resurrect the crushed dreams of her own youth, to finally seize the validation and reverence that had been mercilessly denied to her. Having a child unlocked the floodgates to all her repressed psychoses. But it also amplified the warped principles seared into her psyche from an early age, namely, that perfection and greatness transcend any moral considerations of personal well-being. To Marlene, sacrificing her own child's independence and identity on the altar of achievement wasn't just acceptable, it was a sacred obligation that no casual parent could ever truly grasp. As her disturbing manifesto played out on every news channel and social media feed, the collective outrage only swelled in intensity. Suddenly, Marlene wasn't just emblematic of overbearing parental zeal run amok. She was the very embodiment of sadistic narcissism taken to its ugly extreme. No one exemplified that backlash more than Marlene's own family, the very architects of her childhood torment. In a bombshell interview, her estranged father stepped forward to denounce his daughter's unforgivable atrocities. His words were as chilling as they were damning. "We gave Marlene every opportunity for greatness. Tutors, training camps, the finest facilities, anything to cultivate the talent she proved deficient in harnessing. When she failed us despite those privileges, we were forced to cut her loose in disgrace. How she's chosen to inflict that same misery upon an innocent child only proves she learned nothing from the mistakes of her coddled upbringing." In a dark twist of symmetry, Marlene now found herself utterly disowned by the vicious legacy she had so desperately craved. Her ambitions atomized in the face of a jury's unsparing judgment. Guilty. Guilty on charges of child abuse, false imprisonment, and criminal endangerment. The prosecutor's summation cast Marlene as a raving Medea, willing to commit unspeakable atrocities to satisfy her delusional hunger for vicarious glory. As the guilty verdict was read, I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for the broken, hollowed-out soul shuddering before the bench. In that moment, Marlene Bennett ceased being a monster and simply became pathetic, a sad mirror of how far wounded pride and self-deception can twist the human spirit. The judge showed no such leniency. After scathing federal prosecutors demanded the maximum sentence, Marlene was remanded to a secure psychiatric facility for the next 10 to 20 years, pending mandatory therapy and observation to determine if she still posed a threat to herself and others once her debt to society was paid. It was a fate worse than any conventional prison could inflict. Marlene would be chemically neutered, cauterized of any agency to stoke her warped aspirations of glory, left to rot in an anonymous limbo, drained of the delirious fuel that allowed her grandiose sense of purpose to metastasize in the first place. Yet as the disgraced woman was led away in shackles, her final act shocked even me. Straining against the grip of her escorting officers, Marlene locked her wild eyes onto mine from across the courtroom gallery. "This isn't over, you smug old harpy," she shrieked with unhinged fury. "Your family will be forgotten in mediocrity and failure, just like mine. Mark my words." The outburst earned her a sharp blow to the gut that doubled her over. But even then, her hateful glare remained locked onto me with unsettling intensity, as if issuing an unspoken curse that no prison could ever contain. I had won this battle, saved Elsie from her mother's noxious grip. But at what cost? Though Marlene was in custody, the scars of her abuse would take years to heal, perhaps even spanning generations. With a weary sigh and a heavy heart, I left the carnage of the courtroom behind and set my sights forward. My family's road to recovery was just beginning, after all. The following months passed by in a disorienting whirlwind. With Marlene locked away and Derek dedicated to rebuilding his life with Elsie out west, I was left to pick up the scattered pieces of our shattered existence back home. It wasn't easy. Despite the urban legends that now swirled about the horrors that unfolded under my own roof, the fact remained that most folks still saw me as the well-meaning oldster whose granddaughter was simply collateral damage to her mother's insanity. In other words, pity mixed with more than a hint of disdainful gossip became the brand our family wore like a scarlet letter around town. Grocery clerks who had known me for decades suddenly went cold and aloof. Neighbors stopped waving from across the street. Even Simon retreated behind the isolating walls of his run-down bachelor pad. I understood their reticence, of course. Proximity to the macabre incidents of Marlene's unmaking had become radioactive by association. Still, the loneliness haunted my daily existence like a lingering malaise, with my only haven coming from the occasional phone call giving meager updates on Elsie and Derek's progress out in Montana. "She still won't utter a single word," Derek confided during one such heart-wrenching chat. "Hasn't drawn anything or even cracked a smile since we arrived. It's like part of her soul remains trapped back in that house of horrors." My heart ached for the burdens those two carried, even separated from the source of their strife. I vowed to help them both keep putting one foot in front of the other, no matter how treacherous the path ahead might seem. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, some 6 months after their departure, an unexpected miracle arrived at my doorstep. It was a plain manila envelope unstamped, likely hand-delivered by a local mail carrier. My name scrawled across the front in childlike penmanship that instantly made my heart skip a beat. Elsie. With trembling hands, I tore open the clasp and upended the contents onto my kitchen counter. What spilled out was a drawing. A meticulously detailed pencil sketch of a young woman with sunken eyes, hollowed cheeks, and a beatific smile tugging at the edges of her lips. At first glance, I didn't recognize the gaunt, haunted visage staring back at me from the page. But as my eyes roamed the delicate strokes of graphite that composed her wispy brown hair, the faded floral print of her frayed house dress, a sob hitched in my throat. It was me. My own weary face rendered with soul-lancing tenderness and empathy through the prism of Elsie's wounded psyche. Fresh tears sprang anew when I finally registered the tiny words etched into the bottom corner of the picture. My savior. That was the spark I needed to energize me back into productive motion for the first time in months. If this heartfelt gesture was any indication, then Elsie's once vibrant spirit was finally stirring back to life out there on that distant ranch. That very night, I sprang into a whirlwind of activity arranging travel plans and logistics for an extended trip to visit them both over the winter holidays. No more fragmentary phone calls or letters would suffice to track my granddaughter's step-by-step recovery. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to hold her renewed joy in my arms. The weeks blurred together like frames of an old home movie reel as my departure date steadily approached. Before I knew it, I stood bundled on the windswept front porch, suitcase in hand, and greeted by the grinning, rosy-cheeked face of Simon. "You didn't think I was going to let you make that whole trek alone, did ya?" The gruff loner smiled from beneath his faded cap before nodding toward the battered Ford idling at the curb. "Now come on. Nothing but wide-open road between here and there." My heart swelled with profound gratitude for my newfound friend's enduring devotion. After exchanging a teary hug, I hurried to join him for the long journey toward healing and rebirth. Glancing back at the battered facade of the house one final time, I felt the shadows of old torments recede like a long, fitful nightmare, finally slipping away. Though formidable challenges still lay ahead, the glimmer of hope that Elsie had rediscovered her fighting spirit was the balm I needed to carry on. No matter how long it took, no matter what hurdles arose, I would be there for her restoration. The guardian she needed to guide her back into the warm light of joy and self-discovery. This time, permanently freed from the shackles of her mother's poisonous ambition. With Simon's van, now bound for the winding roads of deliverance, I allowed my spirit to soar ahead with the winds of optimism and renewal. My mission had reached its apex, and the rays of a new dawn beckoned on the horizon. Elsie's torment was over. At long last, the cycle was broken.
The message from my father arrived while I was in the middle of coaching 20 teenagers through their first competitive gaming tournament. My phone buzzed with his text. "Family announcement this weekend. Your presence is required." My name is Avery, and that single message managed to derail my entire week. I hadn't been home in months. Not since the last disastrous family dinner where my stepmother Karen had spent the entire evening showcasing my half-sister Claire's latest achievements while pointedly ignoring mine. Miss Collins, one of my students, waved frantically from their gaming station. The server's acting weird again. I pocketed my phone, pushing aside the knot forming in my stomach. "Coming, Tommy. And remember, in tournament play, we troubleshoot first, panic second." The rest of the day passed in a blur of technical issues and coaching sessions. By closing time, my phone had 3 missed calls from my father and another text. "This is important, Avery. Don't skip out like last time." That night, I sat cross-legged on my couch, staring at my phone while my fiancé Ethan cooked dinner in our small kitchen. "You're doing that thing again," he said, stirring something that smelled amazing. "The one where you overthink everything until your brain explodes." "I don't overthink," I muttered, then caught his knowing look. "Okay, fine. But Dad never demands family meetings. Something's up." "Maybe Claire finally learned how to tie her shoes without help," Ethan joked, then sobered when I didn't laugh. "Sorry." Low blow. I sighed, remembering the last time I'd seen my younger half-sister. Claire had spent the entire evening making subtle digs about my little gaming club, and how it must be so fulfilling to play with other people's children since you can't have any of your own. That particular barb still stung. "I should go," I said finally. If only to stop Dad from sending the National Guard after me. The drive to my childhood home that weekend felt longer than usual. Each mile marker brought back memories of growing up there after my mom died, of my grandmother Helen raising me while Dad was deployed, Claire's arrival when I was 12, and her mother Karen's immediate campaign to remake our family in her image. I pulled into the circular driveway, noting Claire's shiny new Mercedes parked in my usual spot. Of course. Dad opened the door before I could knock. "You're late." "Hello to you too," I said, accepting his awkward hug. He smelled the same as always, Old Spice and coffee. Some things never changed. The living room was exactly as I remembered, down to the family photos on the wall. I noticed with a twinge that Grandmother Helen's portrait had been moved to a less prominent spot. Claire sat in Helen's old armchair like she owned it, Karen perched on the armrest beside her. They both wore matching expressions of barely concealed satisfaction that made my skin crawl. "Now that we're all here," Dad cleared his throat, "Claire has some news." My sister's hand drifted to her stomach in a gesture that made my heart sink before she even opened her mouth.
I'm pregnant, Claire announced, her smile sharp as a knife. You're going to be an aunt, Avery. Isn't that wonderful? Now you'll finally get to experience what it's like to have a baby in the family, even if it's not quite the same as having your own. The room went silent. I felt the familiar sting of tears threatening to form but forced them back. Claire's words hung in the air like poison, perfectly crafted to hit where it hurt most. Dad shifted uncomfortably. We thought you should hear it in person. Family first, right? I managed a tight smile, even as my fingers curled into fists at my sides. Congratulations, I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. If you'll excuse me, I need some air. As I walked out onto the porch, I heard Karen's voice drift through the open window. She's always been dramatic. Don't let her ruin your moment, sweetheart. I leaned against the railing, letting the cool evening air clear my head. Something in me had shifted, hardened. This wasn't just about the baby announcement. This was about years of subtle cruelty, of calculated jabs and manufactured competitions. My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. You okay? I wasn't. But I would be. 'Cause for the first time in my life, I was done playing nice. I didn't expect Dad to follow me onto the porch, but there he was, closing the screen door behind him with that familiar, careful quietness, the same way he used to check on me after Mom died. Your grandmother used to stand right there, he said, gesturing to where I was leaning against the railing. Watching storms roll in. I remember. I didn't add that I also remembered how Helen was the only one who stood up to Karen when she tried to redecorate the entire house, claiming the porch furniture was too country. The wicker chairs were still here, a small victory in a war of attrition. Karen's organizing a baby shower next month, Dad said, his voice carefully neutral. She wants to do it here. Course she did. The same house where Helen had raised me, where I'd spent countless hours reading in the window seat that Karen had later converted into a display case for Claire's cheerleading trophies. You don't have to come, he added quickly. Don't I? I turned to face him. Won't it look bad if the aunt doesn't show up? Won't Karen have something to say about that? He flinched. Avery. The screen door creaked open and Claire waddled out, one hand on her barely visible bump. Daddy, Mom wants to know if you'll grab more wine from the cellar. The good stuff, not the cheap bottles Avery brought last time. I hadn't brought any wine last time. Claire knew that. Sure, princess. Dad disappeared inside, leaving us alone. Claire's sweet smile dropped the instant he was gone. You know, you could at least pretend to be happy for me. I am happy for you, I lied. Thrilled, even. Really? Because you stormed out pretty quickly after my announcement. I needed air. You needed attention, she corrected, moving closer. Just like always. Poor infertile Avery can't stand someone else being the center of attention for once. My nails dug into my palms. Is that what you think this is about? I think it's about what everything's always been about with you. Jealousy. She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. You're jealous that I can have what you can't. That I'm giving Dad his first grandchild. That Mom loves me more than. Karen isn't my mother, I cut in. And Helen left me the house. Claire's face went white. What? I hadn't meant to say it. The paperwork had arrived last week, Helen's final gift, held in trust until my 28th birthday. I'd been waiting for the right time to tell everyone, but Claire's smug superiority had cracked something in me. The house is mine, I said, the words tasting like victory. Grandmother Helen left it to me in her will. I get full ownership next month. Claire's hands trembled. You're lying. Ask Dad. He's known for years. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. So, maybe you should rethink having your baby shower here. Wouldn't want to impose. The screen door slammed open. Karen stood there, her face twisted with rage. I heard everything, she hissed. How dare you? How dare I what? Inherit my grandmother's house? Claire is pregnant. This is her moment, and you're trying to ruin it with your spiteful little power play. Karen. Dad appeared behind her, holding a wine bottle. What's going on? Your daughter is trying to kick us out of our home. That's not what I said, I protested, but Claire was already crying, her hands protectively covering her stomach. The stress isn't good for the baby, she sobbed. She's trying to hurt my baby. Dad looked between us, lost. Avery, maybe we should discuss this another time. Of course, I said quietly. Take care of your pregnant daughter. It's what you do best. I walked to my car, ignoring Karen's continued accusations and Dad's weak attempts to call me back. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Claire in my rearview mirror. She wasn't crying anymore. Instead, she was watching me leave with the same calculating expression she'd worn when she'd announced her pregnancy. This wasn't over. We both knew it. But for the first time, I had something she wanted. And I intended to use it. The message that broke me came from Sarah, my oldest student's mother, 3 days after the family dinner. She wanted to discuss some concerns about my mentorship program. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop, expecting questions about tournament schedules or equipment fees. I was wrong. I heard some disturbing things, Sarah said, stirring her untouched latte. About your situation. My stomach dropped. My situation? Your sister Claire reached out to several parents. She mentioned your condition might affect your ability to relate to children properly. Sarah wouldn't meet my eyes. She suggested we might want to consider other programs. The coffee shop's ambient chatter faded to white noise. Claire hadn't just attacked me personally. She'd gone after my business, my students, everything I'd built. My infertility has nothing to do with my ability to teach, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. Tommy's tournament rankings have improved by 30% since he started with us. I know, but what? Claire's pregnant, so suddenly she's an expert on children? Sarah shifted uncomfortably. She mentioned she's starting her own youth program. Something more traditional, less competitive. Of course she was. Claire had never shown any interest in gaming or coaching before, but now that she knew it mattered to me, I stood up, nearly knocking over my chair. Excuse me. I need to make a call. Sighed, I pressed my forehead against the cool brick wall and dialed Claire's number. She answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting. Hello, sister dear. How are you coping with the house news? Cut the act, I snapped. I know what you're doing. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, I'm just looking out for children's best interests. After all, what would our grandmother think about you using her house to run a business teaching kids to waste their lives playing games? Don't you dare bring Helen into this. Why not? She's the reason you think you're better than everyone else. Perfect Avery, Helen's favorite, too good for family now that she has her precious inheritance. Is that what this is about? You're sabotaging my business because you're jealous of a house? Claire's laugh was bitter. I'm protecting vulnerable children from someone who can't possibly understand what it means to be a mother. You should thank me, really. Now you won't have to pretend anymore. I ended the call before I could say something I'd regret. My phone immediately buzzed with a text from Claire. By the way, I've already got 5 of your students' parents interested in my new program. Funny how quickly they change their minds when they learn the truth about you. I slumped against the wall, fighting back tears. Years of work, of building trust with these families, and Claire was destroying it all with a few well-placed words. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Ethan. Hey, you okay? Your afternoon class is starting soon. Class. I'd almost forgotten. I had 6 teenagers waiting to learn advanced strategy techniques, kids who trusted me, who'd improved under my guidance despite my condition. I straightened up, wiping my eyes. Claire wanted to play dirty? Fine. But she'd forgotten something important. I'd learned strategy from the best. And Helen hadn't just left me a house. She'd left me her entire gaming collection, including journals full of tournament notes dating back decades. I texted Ethan back, "I'm good. Actually, I have an idea. Remember that charity tournament we talked about? The one you said was too ambitious?" Things change. How fast can you set up a live stream event? And can you get your developer friends involved? Give me 48 hours. What are you planning? I smiled, thinking of Claire's smug face when she thought she'd won. Teaching my sister a lesson about games. And family. And why you should never underestimate someone just because they can't have children. As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in days. Claire thought she could use my infertility against me. She was about to learn that some battles aren't won by having the right biology, they're won by having the right strategy. And I'd been strategizing my whole life. I found the adoption pamphlets while cleaning up after dinner. Ethan had hidden them under a stack of gaming magazines, but they spilled across the kitchen counter when I moved them, glossy pages full of smiling families and promises of new beginnings. "I was going to bring it up differently," Ethan said from the doorway, making me jump. "Maybe over wine. Or after the charity tournament." My fingers traced the edge of a pamphlet. "How long have you been thinking about this?" "Since before Claire's announcement." He moved closer, careful, like I might bolt. "I know the timing seems reactive, but what? You thought now would be perfect?" "Well, my sister is actively trying to destroy everything I've built because she thinks I'm unfit to be around children. That's exactly why we should consider it." Ethan picked up one of the pamphlets. "To prove her wrong. To show everyone that family isn't about biology or pregnancy announcements. It's about love and choice." My phone buzzed, another parent withdrawing from the program. Third one this week. "Claire would use it against us," I said quietly. "She'd say we're only doing it to compete with her pregnancy. To steal her spotlight. Since when do you care what Claire thinks? Since she started poisoning my entire life." The words burst out louder than intended. "She's turning everyone against me, Ethan. Parents, Dad, even my own students are starting to doubt me. And now you want to add adoption scrutiny to that mix? I want to build a future with you," he said. "One that isn't defined by what Claire does or doesn't do." My phone buzzed again. This time it was Dad. "Claire's having complications. Doctor ordered bed rest. She's staying at the house. Thought you should know." Of course she was staying at the house. My house. The one Helen left to me. "She's moving in," I said, showing Ethan the message. "She's actually moving into the house before I can even claim it. Can she do that?" "Dad's still technically the executor until my birthday next month. He can let anyone stay there he wants." I laughed, the sound hollow. "Want to bet she'll have redecorated my old room for the nursery before I get the keys?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, then, "Maybe we should move." "What?" "After the tournament. After you get the house. We could sell it, move somewhere Claire can't reach us. Start fresh, maybe look into adoption agencies in another state." "Run away, you mean?" I stared at the pamphlets, at all those perfect families smiling up at me. Let Claire win. Let her have an empty victory while we build something real. Another text from Dad. "Karen's organizing a baby shower here next week. Claire really wants you there. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I picked up one of the adoption pamphlets, really looking at it this time. A young couple played with their adopted daughter, their faces bright with genuine joy. No forced smiles, no calculated performances. Just family. "Helen always said the house was meant to be a home," I said slowly. "Not a weapon. What are you thinking?" I reached for my laptop. "I'm thinking it's time to change the game. Claire wants to play happy families? Fine. But first, we're going to show everyone what real family support looks like." I pulled up the charity tournament plans we'd been working on. What if we made it bigger? Not just gaming, a full community event. supporting local adoption agencies, foster care programs. Using Claire's tactics against her? No. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Using my grandmother's strategy. She always said the best way to win isn't to tear others down, it's to build something so beautiful they can't ignore it. Ethan grinned. I love it when you get that look. What's the first move? I picked up my phone, ignoring Dad's text to compose a different message. This one to all my remaining students' parents. Invitation to a special announcement. Time to show you what our program is really about. Claire wanted war? I'd give her something better, hope. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find some for myself along the way. The lawyer's office felt too small for the 5 of us. Dad sat between Claire and me while Karen hovered protectively behind Claire's chair. The inheritance paperwork lay unopened on Mr. Peterson's desk, but that wasn't why we were here. Let me understand this correctly, Mr. Peterson said, adjusting his glasses. Miss Collins, you're requesting an early transfer of property ownership due to unauthorized renovations? I placed my phone on his desk, playing the video Tommy's mom had sent me yesterday. The footage showed Karen directing workers at the house, supervising as they carried Helen's antique furniture out to a waiting truck. They're gutting my grandmother's home, I said. Without permission. We're preparing the nursery, Karen cut in. Richard approved it. Dad shifted uncomfortably. I didn't realize they were removing Helen's things. Of course you didn't. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. You never notice anything when it comes to Claire. Claire's hand moved protectively over her bump. The doctor said stress isn't good for the baby. And that old furniture was full of dust and that furniture was my inheritance. My voice cracked. Everything in that house meant something. Every piece had a story. Stories don't matter to a baby, Claire said softly, her eyes gleaming with false concern. But I understand why you're so attached. It must be hard knowing you'll never have a real family to pass these things down to. The room went silent. Even Karen looked shocked at Claire's cruelty. Miss Collins, Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, legally speaking, until your 28th birthday next month, your father retains executor rights. However, given the circumstances... My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. Local news picked up the charity tournament story. They want to interview you about combining gaming with adoption awareness. Something clicked in my mind. I'd like to make a proposal, I said, sitting straighter. Dad, you want peace in the family. Claire, you want the nursery. Fine. Keep the house for now. Claire's triumphant smile lasted exactly 3 seconds. But I'm hosting my charity tournament there next week. A full media event highlighting local adoption services and foster care programs. After all, I met Claire's eyes. It's still legally Dad's house, and he always taught us about giving back to the community. Right, Dad? Dad's military posture returned, the way it always did when he was cornered. That seems reasonable. You can't be serious, Karen sputtered. Claire needs rest, not some noisy gaming circus. The event will be in the backyard, I said. Claire can rest upstairs. Unless there's some reason you don't want the community seeing inside the house. Claire's face went pale. She knew exactly what I was implying. If they refused, people would question why. Especially after Claire had spent weeks spreading rumors about my fitness to work with children. I think it's a wonderful idea, Mr. Peterson said, clearly enjoying the drama. Very much in keeping with Helen's philanthropic spirit. Fine, Claire snapped. Have your little event. But don't think this changes anything. That house will never be yours in the way that really matters. You'll never fill it with family the way I will. I stood up, gathering my things. You know what, Claire? You're right. I won't fill it with family, because family isn't about filling spaces. It's about building connections. Something Grandmother Helen tried to teach us, though clearly only one of us was listening. As I reached the door, Dad called out, Avery, wait! The event team will be there Monday to set up, I said without turning around. Try not to remove any more of Helen's memories before then. Outside, my hand shook as I texted Ethan. It's done. Plan B is go. His reply was immediate. You sure about this? Once we start, I looked back at the lawyer's office, where Claire was already playing the victim for Dad again. She thought she'd won by taking Helen's house. She had no idea that some victories came disguised as losses. I'm sure, I typed. Time to show everyone what real family looks like. And this time I had more than just games up my sleeve. I had truth. The charity tournament was supposed to be my moment of triumph. Instead, I stood frozen in Helen's backyard, now barely recognizable under Karen's garden party decorations, watching Claire steal even this from me. As someone who truly understands the importance of nurturing children, Claire was saying to the local news reporter, one hand resting on her visible bump, I'm excited to announce my own youth mentorship program, one that focuses on traditional values and real family connections. The camera panned to capture the crowd's approving nods. Several of my former students' parents stood among them, including Sarah, who couldn't quite meet my eyes. Of course, Claire continued, her voice dripping with false concern. We'll welcome all children, even those from alternative family structures. After all, everyone deserves guidance from someone who understands traditional family values. Ethan's hand found mine, squeezing tight. We can still shut this down. It's your event, your grandmother's property. Actually, Karen stepped forward, brandishing a paper. We have something to share about that. She smiled at the reporter. Richard, dear, would you like to make the announcement? Dad emerged from the crowd, looking uncomfortable but determined. Given Claire's condition and her new community program, we've decided to transfer ownership of the house to her permanently. The paperwork was filed this morning. The world tilted sideways. You can't, I whispered, but the microphones picked it up. The inheritance was contingent on several factors, Karen cut in smoothly, including the property's continued use for family purposes. Richard and I agree that Claire's program better serves that intention. Claire's triumphant smile felt like a knife. We're keeping Helen's legacy alive the way she would have wanted, by nurturing future generations. Not through video games. I spotted Helen's chest set through the window, still sitting in its familiar spot. The one thing they hadn't packed away yet. My vision blurred. You want to talk about Helen's legacy? My voice shook. Let's talk about what she really wanted. Let's talk about the letter she left. Commotion near the house cut me off. Tommy, my youngest student, had slipped inside and was now running back out, Helen's chest set clutched in his arms. Miss Collins! I saved it before they could. He tripped. The antique chess set flew from his hands in slow motion. Pieces scattered across the patio like broken dreams. The hand-carved board splitting with a crack that felt like Helen's heart breaking all over again. This is exactly why children need proper supervision, Claire announced to the crowd. From people who understand. Shut up. The words came out raw. Just shut up, Claire. You didn't even know her. You spent every holiday at your mom's parents' house. You never sat with Helen, never learned her stories, never. But I'm giving her what she always wanted, Claire interrupted. A real family in her home. Children. A future. What can you offer except broken games and empty rooms? Cameras were still rolling. My students watched with wide eyes. Everything I'd built, everything I'd planned, lay shattered like the chess pieces at my feet. I think we're done here, Karen announced, moving to usher the reporters toward Claire. We'll have a proper press release about the new program tomorrow. Dad stepped toward me, conflict written across his face. Avery, don't. I backed away, nearly tripping over the chess pieces. Just don't. I turned and ran, ignoring Ethan's calls, ignoring the murmurs from the crowd. Behind me, I heard Claire's voice rise again as I was saying about traditional family values. My car wouldn't start. Of course it wouldn't. I slammed my hands against the steering wheel, finally letting the tears fall. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I opened it, expecting more disaster. Instead, I found a photo, Helen's desk drawer partially open, revealing a sealed envelope with my name on it. Below the photo was a message. Found this while they were packing up. Thought you should know. The moving guy. Through my tears, I smiled. Maybe Helen had one last move to play after all. Breaking into my own inheritance wasn't exactly how I'd planned to spend the evening, but here I was, picking the lock to Helen's study while Ethan kept watch. The moving truck wouldn't arrive until morning. This was my last chance. "Someone's coming," Ethan whispered. I finally felt the lock click. 2 minutes. That's all I need. Claire's voice drifted up the stairs. I just need to grab something from the study. The decorator wants to see. The door opened before I could hide. Claire stood there, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the doorframe. For a moment, we just stared at each other. "I knew it," she said, her voice rising. "Mom." "Dad." "Avery's trying to steal." "The letter." I held up my phone, showing her the photo. "That's all I want. The one in Helen's desk. There is no letter." But her eyes darted to the drawer. Karen's footsteps thundered up the stairs. I lunged for the desk, yanking the drawer open as Claire screamed, "She's attacking me!" The envelope was there, just as the photo showed. I grabbed it just as Karen burst in, Dad right behind her. "She pushed me." Claire stumbled backward dramatically, but her heel caught the antique rug. This time, her fall wasn't staged. She went down hard, crying out in genuine pain. "Claire!" Karen rushed to her side while Dad blocked the doorway, his face a storm of confusion and anger. "I never touched her," I said, backing away. "Check the security cameras." Helen had them installed everywhere, remember? To protect her antiques. Claire's face went white. "The cameras are working perfectly," Ethan cut in, holding up his phone. "I'm a developer, remember? Accessing their feed was pretty easy. Especially since Avery still had Helen's passwords." "Show me," Dad demanded. Ethan pulled up the footage. We watched in silence as it showed me entering the study, Claire following, and her deliberate stumble, followed by the real fall that no one had caused. "You've been recording us?" Karen's voice shook with rage. "Invading our privacy?" "No," I said, opening Helen's letter. "I've been protecting her legacy. The way she taught me." The letter was short but devastating. Helen had known about Claire and Karen's manipulations. She'd left the house to me with specific conditions, including one that said if anyone tried to contest the inheritance through legal means, everything would be donated to a children's charity instead. "You can't prove when that was written," Karen snapped. "We'll challenge it." "Check the metadata on the security footage," Ethan said quietly. Helen recorded herself writing and sealing this letter 3 days before she died. She knew exactly what would happen. Claire struggled to sit up, her face twisted with pain and fury. "This doesn't change anything. I'm still giving Dad what you never could, a real family, a grandchild, a future." "Claire," Dad's voice cracked. "Stop." We all turned to him. He looked older suddenly, defeated. "I watched the footage," he said. "All of it. The way you've been treating your sister, the things you've said about her students, her business." He shook his head. "Helen was right. I've been blind." "Richard," Karen started, but he held up his hand. "The house stays with Avery, as Helen wanted. And Claire." He finally met my eyes. "You owe your sister an apology." Claire's laugh was bitter. "For what? For wanting what's rightfully mine? For trying to build something real instead of playing games?" "That's exactly what Helen was afraid of," I said, reading from the letter. Family isn't about ownership or control. It's about nurturing growth, supporting dreams, and understanding that love multiplies. It doesn't divide. I folded the letter carefully. Keep the furniture you moved. Keep the renovations. But the house is mine. And I know exactly what I'm going to do with it. What's that? Claire spat. I smiled, thinking of the adoption pamphlets waiting at home. I'm going to fill it with family. Just not the kind you understand. As I walked out, I heard Dad following. Maybe some bridges weren't completely burned after all. But first, I had a real legacy to build. 6 months later, I stood in Helen's study, my study now, watching the sunset paint the walls gold. The room still held her presence, though I'd made some changes. Her chess set, carefully restored, sat beside my gaming equipment. Old and new, just like she would have wanted. The sound of children laughing drifted up from the backyard. My advanced gaming class was having their graduation ceremony, complete with proud parents and a local news crew. This time, the coverage was about our program's success, not family drama. Miss Collins. Tommy poked his head in. They're ready for the presentation. Thanks, buddy. I'll be right down. He hesitated. Is it true? About you and Mr. Brooks adopting? News travels fast, I smiled. We're just starting the process. It's going to take time. Cool. He grinned. You're already pretty good at the mom stuff anyway. As he bounded away, I caught my reflection in Helen's old mirror. I looked different somehow, stronger maybe. More like her than ever. Dad was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. We'd been rebuilding slowly, coffee dates and careful conversations. Today was the first time he'd visited the house since everything happened. Karen left, he said quietly, after Claire's baby shower last week. Said she couldn't handle the shame of. He trailed off. The video going public? The security footage had leaked somehow, not through Ethan or me, showing Claire's manipulations and lies. Her traditional values program had collapsed overnight. Dad nodded. Claire's staying with her aunt in Colorado. Says she needs space to find herself before the baby comes. He met my eyes. She asked about you. Did she? Wanted to know if you'd really turn the house into some kind of gaming orphanage, her words. I laughed. Just a regular gaming academy. Though we do offer scholarships now, thanks to Helen's foundation. Through the window, I could see Ethan setting up the presentation screen, my students helping him arrange chairs. Sarah, who'd returned with a heartfelt apology after the truth came out, was organizing refreshments. Helen would be proud, Dad said. Not just of this, but of how you handled everything. You didn't let anger win. No, I agreed. I let love win. The way she taught me. We walked outside together. The evening air was warm, carrying the scent of Helen's roses, the one part of the garden I hadn't changed. As my students gathered for the ceremony, I noticed a familiar figure standing at the gate. Claire. She looked smaller somehow, less certain. When our eyes met, she didn't smile or wave. She just watched, one hand resting on her bump, as I awarded certificates and praised each student's achievements. As I announced our new adoption support initiative, partnering with local agencies to help families navigate the system. When the ceremony ended, I expected her to leave. Instead, she walked to Helen's rose garden, touching a bloom gently. She taught me about these once, Claire said as I approached. I pretended not to care, but I remembered everything she said. Why are you here? I don't know. She looked lost. Maybe to see what real legacy looks like. We stood in silence, the roses swaying between us like memories. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said finally. But my baby. Your niece. I don't want her growing up thinking family is about winning and losing. It's not, I said. It's about growing. Sometimes together, sometimes apart. She nodded once, then turned to leave. The roses look good, she said softly. You take care of them like she did. I watched her go, feeling something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. We were both Helen's roses, grown in different gardens. Later, as Ethan and I cleaned up, he asked, "You okay?" I looked around at my home, at the gaming equipment and chess sets, at the adoption paperwork on my desk, at Helen's roses blooming in the twilight, at all the different ways love could grow. "Yeah," I said. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Family, I'd learned, wasn't about blood or birthright. It was about choosing to nurture what matters, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Just like Helen always said,